My name is Leah Voss. I am 28 years old. And the detail I keep coming back to, the one I cannot make ordinary no matter how many times I turn it over, is not the invitation list itself. It is the text message. The one my mother sent to my sister on a Tuesday afternoon in March, 14 words, and she had copied my aunt on the thread, and somehow that chain arrived in my inbox 3 weeks later because my aunt forwarded it to the wrong address. 14 words. I agree. The day will be better without the tension Leah brings. That was the whole of it. That was the sentence my mother had composed, reviewed, and sent. And somewhere in the architecture of that sentence, in the ease of it, in the absence of hesitation, was everything I needed to understand about what 7 years of generosity had actually built. I need to tell you how I got there. Because the invitation list and the photographer deposit and the band contract, none of that makes sense without the years that came before it. And the years do not make sense without the particular way my family was assembled and the particular role I had agreed, over a long time, and without ever quite naming what I was agreeing to play inside it. There are 4 of us. My father, Douglas Voss, who spent 20 years as a machinist at a mid-sized fabrication shop in Fort Wayne, Indiana, a quiet man by nature and by long practice, the kind of quiet that is sometimes genuine peace, and is sometimes simply the habit of not stepping into difficult rooms. My mother, Renata, who is warm and expressive in the way that some people are warm and expressive primarily toward the people they have decided deserve it, and who made that determination about her children early, and with considerable finality. My sister Brooke, 2 years older than me, who has always been the center of my mother's attention and warmth in a way I stopped resenting somewhere in my late teens and simply accepted the way you accept a climate, not because it is fair, but because arguing with weather is exhausting and changes nothing. And me, the younger one, the one who moved away. I left Fort Wayne in the spring of 2019 at 22 years old with $4,300 in savings, a communications degree from Indiana State, and a job offer from an event production company in Nashville called Aldrin and Fox. I had graduated without distinction. My GPA was 3.1, which is respectable and unremarkable, but I had something the hiring manager, a woman named Sandra Kipp, told me later was considerably harder to teach. I was genuinely good at tracking moving pieces under pressure, and I stayed calm when things fell apart. Event production rewards that combination specifically. I was hired as a production coordinator at $36,800 per year, and I reported to Sandra directly, and I learned more from her in the first 2 years than I had in 4 years of coursework. By October of 2020, I had been promoted to senior coordinator at $48,500. By early 2022, I was managing mid-scale events independently, corporate retreats, private milestone celebrations, the occasional wedding for clients who wanted full production oversight rather than a traditional planner. My income that year was $61,200. I had an apartment on the east side of Nashville. I had a savings account I checked quarterly and felt quietly proud of. I had a credit card I paid in full every month. I had built, from the $4,300 I left with, something that functioned well and was mine. I had never told my family the specific number. What I had told them was that I was doing well, which was true, and what I had shown them, without totaling it, without attaching any meaning to the accumulation, was a series of contributions across 4 years that I had treated as ordinary expressions of love and had never thought to add up. In November of 2020, my parents' furnace failed 3 weeks before Thanksgiving. The replacement unit and installation came to $3,847. My father's hours at the shop had been cut by nearly a third that year, and the timing was bad in the way that these things are always bad for people without a significant cushion. I covered the furnace. I wired the money on a Tuesday afternoon and did not mention it again because there was nothing to mention. It needed doing and I could do it, and that was the whole of my reasoning. In the spring of 2021, Brooke got engaged. She had met a man named Curtis Fellon in late 2019. He sold commercial insurance, even-tempered, pleasant in the slightly generic way of men who have been well-liked their entire lives, and they had gotten engaged in January of 2021 at a restaurant in Indianapolis. My mother called me at 9:15 a.m. the morning after to tell me, and her voice had the quality it only ever had for Brooke, a fullness, a warmth without effort, the sound of a person reporting news that has confirmed something they already believed about the world. I said the right things. I meant most of them. Brooke and I have never been close in the way sisters are supposed to be close, but I did not wish her anything other than happiness. The engagement party was planned for April of 2021. My mother mentioned, in the particular sideways manner she had of mentioning things that were requests without the structure of requests, a mention, a pause, a waiting, that the venue they had in mind was a private room at a restaurant downtown, and the rental fee was $2,200, and that money was a little tighter than usual with the furnace having been such an unexpected hit. I understood the mention. I asked her to send me the details, and I paid the $2,200 by credit card the following day. In the fall of 2021, my father needed a dental procedure, a crown on a back molar, nothing serious, but not covered by his insurance beyond the first $800. The remaining out-of-pocket was $1,340. My mother called on a Thursday evening to tell me about it in the same sideways manner. I told her not to worry about it and sent the money that week. In the spring of 2022, the wedding planning began in earnest. Brooke and Curtis had set a date in June of 2023, 14 months out, which is reasonable for a mid-sized venue in a mid-sized city, and the logistics of building a wedding were underway in my family's house, with the specific energy of a project that has captured everyone's full attention. My mother called me on a Sunday afternoon in late March of 2022, and the call had that particular texture I had learned to recognize. Warm opening, family news, and then, held lightly, the mention. The mention was the photographer. Brooke had found someone whose work was exceptional, Jess Hartley, based in Indianapolis, with a portfolio my mother described in some detail, and a deposit of $2,800, non-refundable, required to hold the date. It was, my mother said, a significant amount, and with everything else being planned and coordinated and budgeted, this particular deposit was proving difficult at this particular moment. She said she mentioned it only because she knew how much Leah cared about Brooke having everything wonderful on her day. I recognized the architecture of this sentence and what it was built to do. I asked my mother to send me Jess Hartley's contact information. I reached out to Jess Hartley directly on April 3, 2022, at 11:22 a.m. We spoke by phone for 20 minutes. She was professional, organized, specific about her process and her terms. I told her I was covering the deposit as a wedding gift and asked her to send me the contract. She sent it by email at 2:47 p.m. the same day. I reviewed the contract that evening, signed it, and paid the $2,800 deposit by credit card on April 7, 2022, at 2:14 p.m. My name appeared on the contract as primary client. The booking was confirmed. I forwarded the confirmation to my mother and did not think about the specific wording of the contract terms for another 11 months. 3 weeks later, in late April of 2022, my mother mentioned the band. The mention had the same texture as the photographer mention, warm, sideways, held lightly. Brooke and Curtis had found a 5-piece band they loved for the reception, she said, and the full booking fee was $4,100, payable in advance to secure the date. She had mentioned it to me because she thought I might want to contribute if I was able, knowing how important this was to Brooke. She said it without pressure, in the particular tone that is indistinguishable from pressure only when you have heard it enough times to understand its grammar. I paid the $4,100 on April 28, 2022. I contacted the band's booking manager, a man named Theo Allgate, directly by email at 9:30 a.m. He sent the contract that afternoon. I signed and paid by credit card at 4:17 p.m. My name appeared on the contract as primary client. Theo Allgate sent a confirmation with the event details, and I filed it in a folder labeled Brooke Wedding alongside the Jess Hartley confirmation, and I did not open that folder again for almost a year. I want to be clear about something else first, something about the pattern I had been inside for long enough that I had stopped being able to see it from the outside. Brooke had always been the wedding. Not just this wedding, but the whole grammar of my family's aspirations. From the time we were small, the implicit understanding in my parents' house was that Brooke's life was the life that mattered in a certain particular way, the one that got framed, celebrated, attended to with care. This is not a complaint. It is an observation I arrived at slowly, The way you arrive at things you have been too close to see clearly, and it is not the whole story of my family, only the part of the story that is relevant here. What was relevant here was this. I had spent 4 years contributing to a family that operated on a clear and consistent hierarchy of attention, and I had done so without requiring that hierarchy to acknowledge me in return. I had not needed to be at the center. I had not needed the warmth that flowed most naturally toward Brooke to be redirected toward me in equal measure. What I had needed, apparently without ever articulating it clearly enough to know it could be taken from me, was simply to be counted, to be on the list. My mother had once said to me, at Christmas, 3 years earlier, after I had missed a flight home and arrived a day late, that I had a talent for making things harder than they needed to be. I had thought about that sentence many times. I had wondered, in the way you wonder about things you have not fully examined, whether she was right. Whether there was something about my presence that introduced a quality of difficulty into rooms, the way she described. Whether the tension Brooke and Curtis had identified was something real that I carried. I had decided, in the 11 months between the band deposit and the email chain, that the answer was no. That the tension my family identified in me was not a quality I possessed, but a quality they assigned, the specific friction of a person who could not be entirely controlled, who had left and built something independent and did not need them in the ways they had expected to be needed. That was the tension, not a temperament. A refusal, however quiet and unintentional, to be only what they wanted me to be. I want to be clear about what I was thinking at the time I made these payments, because I think it matters to the story. I was not thinking strategically. I was not protecting myself. I was not anticipating any scenario in which the contracts would become significant. I was thinking, this is my family and I help when I can, and helping when I can is what love looks like in practice. I had never tallied the contributions across the 4 years, because I was not thinking in those terms. The furnace, the engagement party, the dental procedure, the photographer, the band. None of it had a column. None of it had a total. It was simply what I did. Before I tell you about the email chain, I want to ask you something. Where are you right now as you watch this? Are you somewhere with people nearby, or somewhere quiet and alone? I was alone in my Nashville apartment on the night the forwarded email arrived, and the specific quality of that solitude, the way there was no one in it to help me make sense of what I was reading, is part of the texture of the memory in a way I have not been able to separate from the rest of it. I wonder sometimes whether things would have settled differently if someone had been there. I wonder if I would have moved more slowly or more quickly. I cannot know. The forwarded email chain arrived in my inbox at 9:47 p.m. on a Tuesday in March of 2023. My Aunt Frances, my mother's older sister, a woman I have always been closer to than my mother realized, had apparently intended to forward the thread to her own secondary email address. She had the wrong address. Mine ends in the same domain as her secondary account, and we share a first initial, and she was not, she told me later, wearing her reading glasses. I read the chain from the bottom up. The oldest messages were logistical, guest counts, dietary restrictions, seating arrangements for older relatives. Then, partway up, a message from Brooke to my mother dated February 28th. Curtis and I have been talking about it, and we both feel like the day will go smoother without the tension that Leah brings. I think we should leave her off the list. My mother's reply, sent 7 minutes later. I agree. The day will be better without the tension Leah brings. My aunt's reply, for hours after that. Are you sure? She has done so much for this wedding. My mother's reply to that. She'll understand eventually. She always does. I read those 4 messages a second time. Then a third. I set my phone face down on the kitchen counter and stood at the window for a long time, looking at the Nashville skyline in the dark. Not a beautiful skyline, but a present one, all orange light and low winter cloud. I was 28 years old. I had paid, across 4 years, for a furnace, a party, a dental crown, a photographer, and a band. I had done it without asking for acknowledgement or reciprocity. I had done it because it needed doing, and I could do it, and I had believed, without examining the belief very carefully, that this was simply what love between family members looked like in practice. And my family had looked at all of that and decided, in a 7-minute exchange, that the day would be better without me. She'll understand eventually. She always does. I sat in my kitchen for a long time that night, I made a cup of tea I did not drink. I stood at the window again and looked at the skyline again, and I thought about my mother's sentence, "She'll understand eventually." She always does, and what the word always meant in it. Always. Not once, not usually. Always. She had constructed from 28 years of knowing me, a version of me that could be relied upon to understand, to absorb, to recalibrate, to eventually arrive at the same stable acceptance that had always been my role. She was, I thought, probably right about this as a historical matter. I had always understood eventually. I had always absorbed things and gone quiet and returned, after a suitable interval, to reliability. I had been doing it my entire adult life. It was, in fact, exactly the mechanism that had allowed 4 years of financial contribution without a direct request, because she had known correctly that I would respond to the indirect mention, would send the money, would not require acknowledgement or reciprocity, and would eventually be fine about it all. She was probably right that I would understand eventually. The thing she had not calculated, in composing that sentence to her daughter on a Tuesday afternoon, was that understanding and accepting are not the same thing. And that eventually had arrived somewhat sooner than she expected. I picked up my phone. I opened the Brooke wedding folder in my email. I pulled up both contracts and read them from the beginning, not the way I had read them when I first signed, quickly, focused on the payment terms, but carefully and completely, the way Sandra Kipp had taught me to read every contract before an event, looking for what the document actually said rather than what I assumed it said. What both documents said, in their respective modifications and cancellation clauses, was clear. The primary client retained full authority over the booking, including the right to cancel with appropriate notice, transfer primary client status to another party with written acknowledgement and a transfer fee, or modify event details within the scope of the contract. I was the primary client on both. I had full authority over both. I did not make any decisions that night. I want to be precise about this. I closed the contracts, and I went to bed, and I lay in the dark with the particular stillness of a person who has been given information that changes everything and has not yet decided what to do with it. Something inside me had finally gone cold, not in the way that anger feels cold, with its heat just beneath the surface, but in the way that clarity feels cold. The kind of settled, permanent coolness that arrives when you have finally stopped extending benefit of the doubt. I got up at 6:19 a.m. on Wednesday. I made coffee. I sat at my kitchen table with both contracts open on my laptop and a legal pad beside me, and I thought through the situation the way I thought through production problems at Aldrin and Fox, methodically, without emotional interference, focused entirely on what the facts permitted. The facts. I had paid $6,900 in vendor contracts for a wedding to which I had not been invited and from which I had been deliberately excluded. Both contracts named me as primary client. Both gave me full authority over modifications and cancellations, within specified terms. I had not been notified that I was off the guest list by any direct communication from my family. I had not been asked to relinquish or transfer the contracts. I had simply been quietly removed from my sister's wedding and left to discover it by accident, through a misdirected email forwarded by someone who had not been wearing her glasses. On Wednesday morning at 9:15 a.m., I called Jess Hartley. I identified myself as the primary client on the Voss Curtis wedding photography booking and said I needed to discuss a modification. She pulled up the contract, confirmed my identity against the account, and we reviewed the terms together. The $2,800 deposit was non-refundable to me under the contract terms. However, as primary client, I had 3 options: cancel the booking entirely, with the deposit forfeited and the date released back to the photographer, transfer primary client status to another party, requiring written acknowledgement from that party and a $150 modification fee, or leave the booking in place. I told her I would be in touch by Friday. She said that was fine, and she was professional throughout, and I noted that she asked no questions about the circumstances, which I appreciated. At 10:47 a.m., I called Theo Allgate at the band's booking office. The conversation covered similar ground. The full $4,100 had been paid. As primary client, I could cancel with at least 7 days formal notice, in which case the payment was forfeited and the date released, transfer primary client status with written acknowledgement from the receiving party, and a $200 modification fee, or leave the booking in place. I told him I would be in touch by Friday as well. I sat with both conversations for the rest of Wednesday and through Thursday. I was not in a hurry. I had been patient for 7 years. I could be patient for 2 more days. On Thursday evening at 7:38 p.m. I called my mother. She answered on the second ring. Her voice was warm in the effortful way, the performed warmth, not the natural kind. She asked how I was. I told her I was well. Then I told her in a quiet and level voice that I had received a forwarded email chain by accident and had read it, and that I was aware I had been left off the wedding guest list, and that I wanted to give her the opportunity to explain before I made any decisions about the vendor contracts I was holding. The silence that followed lasted 9 full seconds. I know because I counted. "Leah," she started. "I'm not calling to argue," I said. "I would just like to understand." What she offered was not an explanation but a sequence of reframings. She said Brooke and Curtis had felt that my presence sometimes created a certain atmosphere. She said it had been a difficult decision and not a permanent one. She said she had intended to speak with me before the invitations went out. She said she was sorry I had found out the way I did. She did not say the decision was wrong. She said she was sorry I had found out the way I did, which is a different sentence entirely, and I noted the difference. I listened to everything. When she was finished, I said, "I need a few days. I'll be in touch." I ended the call at 7:54 p.m. My sister called at 8:31 p.m. I did not answer. She called again at 9:07 p.m. and left a voicemail. In it she said she loved me and that this had been a very hard decision, and that she hoped I could understand that her wedding day needed to feel a certain way, and she hoped I could respect that. She did not mention the photographer. She did not mention the band. She did not know, yet, that I had read the contracts. On Friday morning at 8:45 a.m. I called Jess Hartley and informed her I was canceling the photography booking. The $2,800 deposit was forfeited. The date was released. She noted the cancellation in her system and emailed me a written confirmation at 9:03 a.m. At 9:17 a.m. I called Theo Allgate and provided formal cancellation notice for the band booking. The $4,100 remained with the vendor. The date was released. Written confirmation arrived at 9:44 a.m. At 10:02 a.m., I sent a single text message to my mother. It read, "I've canceled both vendor bookings, the photographer and the band. The contracts were in my name. Cancellation confirmations are being forwarded to this number. I wish Brooke and Curtis well." I put my phone in my desk drawer, poured a second cup of coffee, and went to work. The first call came at 10:23 a.m. My mother. I did not answer. The second at 10:41 a.m. Brooke. I did not answer. My father called at 11:15 a.m. He almost never called me directly, and left a voicemail in his quiet voice saying that things had gotten confused and that he hoped I would call him back. By 3 p.m. I had received 22 calls across 3 family numbers. My mother's voicemails moved through registers I had rarely heard from her. First disbelief, then a controlled outrage about what I had done to Brooke's plans, then something that sounded, by the 5th or 6th message, like genuine distress as the practical reality of 2 missing vendors 6 weeks before the wedding became concrete. At 1:47 p.m., she left a message that said, "Leah, we need you. You know how these things work. Please just call us back. We need you." The same family that had decided the day would be better without the tension I create had arrived, in the space of 3 hours, at "We need you." I noted the distance between those 2 sentences and did not call back. On Saturday morning, my father called again at 8:12 a.m. He was the only one who seemed to understand that calling more than once a day was counterproductive, which meant his calls were the ones I almost answered. I listened to the voicemail twice. He said he wanted me to know he had not been part of the decision about the guest list. He said that in his quiet way, without drama or elaboration. He said he had found out the same week the invitations went out and had told my mother he thought it was wrong. He said he was sorry and that he hoped I would let him know I was all right. I texted him on Saturday evening, 1 sentence. "I'm all right. Thank you for saying that." He replied, Good. That was the whole exchange, and it was, in its compression, the most honest conversation I had with anyone in my family that month. Brooke sent a series of text messages between Friday afternoon and Sunday evening. The first 5 were variations of the same theme. The wedding plans were disrupted. Did I understand what I had done? Could I at least explain myself? The 6th, sent on Sunday afternoon, was different in register. It said, "Mom keeps saying you did this to hurt me. I don't think that's right. I think you did it because we hurt you first and you wanted us to feel it. Did it help?" I read that message several times. I did not reply that weekend, but I thought about it a great deal. The accuracy of her reading was, in its way, its own complicated thing. She knew me well enough, underneath everything, to understand the logic of what I had done. She had simply decided, when it came to the guest list, that understanding was not enough to require her to act differently. On Sunday evening, my mother left her longest voicemail yet, 4 minutes and 12 seconds. She said I had ruined months of planning. She said she had always believed I was the steady one, the one who could be counted on, and she did not know who I was behaving like right now, but it was not the Leah she had raised. I listened to the entire message once, and then deleted it. The part one found most striking was the phrase "the Leah she had raised," as though my steadiness and reliability were her achievement, something she had built into me, and now I was malfunctioning. As though it had never been something I had chosen, and kept choosing because I believed it was the right way to be. On Monday morning, I received an email from Brooke. It was long and carefully composed in a way that suggested it had been written and rewritten. She said she knew what she and my mother had decided was hurtful. She said she had not fully thought through what it meant for me to have given so much and then been excluded. She said she was sorry. It was the first time anyone had directed the word sorry at the right thing, not at the inconvenience of my discovery, but at the act itself. I read it 3 times. I did not reply that day. By the week of the wedding, Brooke and Curtis had found a replacement photographer, a friend of a colleague, less experienced than Jess Hartley, available on short notice because she had a cancellation. The band was not replaced. The reception had a DJ. These are things I know because my Aunt Frances called me in July after the wedding and told me gently and without judgment. She said the day had been beautiful in its way. She said my mother had cried once during the reception, quietly, in the parking lot near the venue entrance, and my aunt had gone to her and asked what was wrong, and my mother had said she did not know how things had gotten so far from where she had meant them to go. I do not tell you that to suggest the story ends in reconciliation. It has not in any complete way, and I have stopped trying to predict whether it will. What I have found, in the months since July, is something I did not expect to find so quickly, a version of ordinary life that does not require me to be anyone's floor. I go to work. I manage productions. I read vendor contracts with the full attention they deserve. I have coffee on Sunday mornings in my kitchen, and I watch the light move across the east-facing window, and I do not spend the hour waiting for my phone to ring with a request I cannot say no to. The Sunday mornings are different now. Quieter. More mine. I spoke with my Aunt Frances in September. She called to check on me, which is what she does, and at the end of the call she said, "For what it's worth, I think you had the right to do what you did." I'm not sure it was the most forgiving thing, but I don't think forgiveness was the point. I have thought about that sentence many times. Forgiveness is something I am working toward in my own time, at my own pace, for my own reasons, not because my family asked for it, and not because the situation required it of me, but because carrying the weight of unresolved things is its own kind of expensive, and I have a long life left to live. Generosity, without boundaries, is not love. It is an open account with no terms and no limit, and it will be drawn against for as long as you leave it open. I understand that now with a clarity I did not have in April of 2022, sitting at my kitchen table and reading a photographer's contract that I had signed in good faith for a wedding I was not going to attend. If you have ever paid a vendor deposit as a gift for a family event, it is worth knowing that the primary client named on a vendor contract retains full authority over that booking regardless of who benefits from the service, including the right to cancel or transfer within the contract's specific terms. Before making a significant gift payment for any family event, it may be worth considering whose name belongs on the contract. That choice carries more practical weight than it appears to at the moment of signing. If you were in Leah's position, if you had paid $6,900 in vendor contracts for a wedding you had been quietly removed from, and you held full primary client authority over both bookings, would you have canceled both the way she did, or would you have transferred the contracts to your sister and walked away?